Alrighty, good morning. This is Jonathan Albin, NycosRPG, and this is Creative Differences, where we talk about role-playing environments and the benefits of the NycosRPG system. Now, I've talked about it a lot, but I've never talked about it in a way that makes it understandable. So I want to go through really quickly what Nycos is and what it is not in a rapid fashion, but I want to cover all the bases. So, first of all, realize that yes, the acronym "Not Your Clumsy Old System" does apply. This is not a mechanism that will be familiar to you if you've been playing role-play games over a long time. But once you play it, it will feel as natural as breathing. It's literally the new old way to play. When we were children, decades ago, 50 years in my case, we played by making stuff up and going with it, and each person would input their portion of the fictional reality, and we would just find ways to blend it together. And that's what the method of Nycos is really about. We're going to talk about it in the same terms that you would with standard role-play games to try to give an understanding of how it is different. But I wanted to kind of go over it all so that we'd have a relatively short burst of information and bring you up to speed really quickly. We have been achieving really good success with brand new players who have never played role-play games before, and that is really the focus and intent, is to bring about a weather change in the way we play so that we can have more people at the tables. So what we're going to look at are the basic attributes of a game of Nycos and how it compares and contrasts with standard role play, hence the name Creative Differences. We're going to be showing the other view as well. So here on the right side of my screen is as I'm looking at it, so as you're looking at it, are the basic categorizations within the rules of Nycos. You have attribution of your base, your race, place, estates, stuff, skills, and role. And you'll notice that in most cases when you're talking about role, you're using the term in reference to a position on a team or a position within a group, and that's really what we're talking about in this case. We're not talking about a role as in a class. Hang on just a second. Hello, Gene. How are you doing? I just haven't jumped into the chat yet. I haven't activated the live game channel. There you go.
In just a moment.
Okay, I'll talk to you in a bit then.
Bye-bye.
So we have a very ardent fan of the show that wants to join with us today, so she'll be jumping onto our live channel, and we'll see whether or not we can bring her into the fold, so to speak, during this conversation. But let's just start off with the root here. The first thing we want to talk about, of course, are the base. And the base values in this case are what would be most equitably compared to the attributes of a classic role-playing game. And while they fit that description, they are more akin to the saving throws. We will have to discuss that in more in particular in a minute, but the idea here is that the base values are originated at persona creation or persona development, and as you develop the persona, those numbers, the base values, are the skeleton, if you will, of the persona. They don't ever change. They'll remain at that value for the length of time that the persona exists. These base values are the fundament that kind of differentiates the Nycos system from all the others, because these base values are literally what the persona has to depend on for their all of their skills developments. It is a skills-based system, but the skills bases are differentiated by those categories. She's signed in, but she hasn't gotten her voice on yet. That always happens.
Hello?
There she is. Hang on a second. I got to see whether you're going out on the audio. Okay, give me a test, Gene.
Hello, how are you this morning?
Looks like it's doing fine. All right. If it doesn't, we'll catch it in post production, so to speak, and we'll advise. But just so you know, Gene, this is today. Although I'm glad to have it from a conversational standpoint. The basis of today's episode is actually to go over NYCOS for those that have never heard of it before, and kind of break down all of the categorical pieces of the game. And we're doing it under the title of creative differences, because I'm going to want to do like a compare and contrast with traditional role-playing games.
Right.
So you came in right at the beginning, so we've only just mentioned the base, which are the core values or central values to the game, and they break down. We're going to go into the individual ones here in a minute and actually break down all of them, but the concept is that these values act as de facto saving throws. If you are not familiar with role-playing games, occasionally a situation will occur where you need to be able to decide whether a person would succeed or fail a basic test of some sort. Like, for example, can they see the red dot on the screen? Or can they pick up the object off of the ground? And this is usually left to a die roll to determine. But in certain cases, those conditions are not as clearly defined as it would be for a skill. Like, for example, loading a weapon, putting bullets in a gun is a skill. Picking up a bullet from a drawer of other stuff is not a skill. There's really not a way to define it, and so therefore they default to the base values of grace or cognizance or whatever, and so they get a die roll test against that. And generally, it's only when there's some reason for there to be a random factor. Normally, if you want to pick something up, you just pick it up, and it's just a conversational point. But the base values give you a way to test those things when you need to. I will come back to the particulars of them in a little bit later in the show. Race is a term that I'm only using here for its mnemonic. In other words, base, race, place, estates is a lot easier to say than base, species. It's just that it compartmentalizes the concept of all the different varied species you could be. And while you could run games where the only species is mortal or human beings, and so therefore there wouldn't be any need for this terminology, generally speaking, role-play games usually embrace the idea of additional sentient species beyond humanity. Whether you're talking about space travel and space races, or fantasy settings where you might have your elves, dwarves, or whatever. Place is a way of saying your social class or position. Is not necessarily class in the concept of Dungeons and Dragons. As a matter of fact, there is no direct D&D correlation to class in NycosRPG, mainly because there are is a difference of philosophy about the roles that we play in life. And so when I speak of place here, this is referring to your social class, your social standing, your pecking order, if you will, in the culture. And it actually, in most cases, place is your culture. It's defining where you originated. Your estates, under the NycosRPG, estates are the motives. What is it that drove your persona to pursue a life of adventure? What was it that brought them into this unique place of becoming a persona. The category of stuff in certain worlds, what you own is much more important than what you believe or what you know or whatever. But in this case, stuff is pretty much artifacts, items, and even the cast-off material that you would use for survival. So it's a very, very broad category. And then the basis of the game are your skills. And in the world of NyCOS, skills in particular include all forms of, for example, magic effects are themselves trained and learnable skills. So you don't have to have a limitation that prevents you from using other devices if you also want to use magic. That's itself is just a separate skills track, so to speak. And then finally, although it's not written down anywhere, the role of a persona is critically important in terms of the pecking order of the adventuring group. Is your persona a defender or a more of an attack agent? Are you an agent of discovery, or are you an agent of intrigue and mystery? So the role you play within the group becomes a feature within the NyCOS system rather than a boundary or a limitation. And that is the basis of what it is to play the game. You have these values, and then you contrast those through a series of different types of conflict. Now, I've gone over this. Gene, you have played a considerable number. I won't say you've played them all, but you played a considerable number of role-playing games in your colorful past. How would you say the NyCOS mechanism compares?
Well, since all of them kind of follow along one track, just a different numbering system, this one's so totally different that I can finally make the characters I've always dreamed about making without sacrificing what level they can get to, because I want skills that quote unquote belong to another system, another class.
Right.
And classes limit you. People are not limited. People go through their lifetime and go through several different roles.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's much more realistic that I'm out. Let's say I was a bookworm and all of a sudden I'm thrust out into the world and I have to survive. Guess what? I have to learn survival skills to survive. So I now have a chance that on a drop of a hat, I can pick up the skill. Now, I don't pick up the whole skill. I pick it down way down low. But I can learn it every week. I can add a point to it. Every week it can go up. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's several other things that allow you to make a sudden jump because you had an insight to it and you run up the scale. It's called ramping. And if you get to a decade number, 10, 20, 30, because everything's base 100
Mm-hmm.
or base 10, and so you can ramp up it. And one night I developed a new skill and I got a ramp and I got up to 25 from something like a 9.
Mm-hmm.
So that's wonderful. All of a sudden, I have a basis of a new skill, and now I can add to it because now I need to survive out in the wilderness.
Sure.
So
Sure.
that's what's wonderful about it. So I can have that ranger, scout, rogue, infiltrator character, uh, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can have the magi who can use a sword and spell through the sword and throw with his hands, or maybe use his head to do it, or sing a song and do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the point is the creativity is limited to what your mind can see.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about the actual mechanism of the game, conflict die rolls come down, or there are 4 different styles of challenges or conflicts within the game. That at the most base level is a mere skills check. As Gene was describing, you pick up a skill, you advance the skill. We'll talk about that in a minute because that's kind of unique too. The advancing of the skills um, really is, I think, an element of, I guess, I would call it the simplicity and the genius of it, in that as a persona in a role play game, one of the biggest challenges, at least historically, with the classic role play games that are out there, is the player having to wait until the game master determines how many earned experience points or whether you deserve an advancement. It's, you know, X number of experience points from this source or that source, and you have to add them all together and determine whether or not, okay, yes, you have my permission to advance your persona. And then the irony is that the advances in that system are sort of capricious. A player can add a feat regardless of there's not really a mechanism for prerequisites, generally speaking. I mean, for example, there's cleave and then there's greater cleave and whatever, but those are very few and far between. Most of your feats are one-off abilities that you can pick capriciously from a list without any role-playing mechanism to justify or explain them. And as a game master, I've always found that problematic. And so with NycosRPG, instead, the players choose their advancement by choosing what skills they want to improve and then utilizing those skills in game. So as that skill is challenged, the player then rolls a percentage dice with the intent of rolling equal to or less than that skill. And whether or not they succeed, they still get to advance it, because the very practice of doing the thing, whatever it is, in game is the justification for the experience. And so therefore it's no longer the storyteller that is improving the persona. It's no game master limits on how many different skills you can learn or advance. It's all on the player. Now, I know that's one of your favorite talking points for NyCOS system is the freedom of it. But hey, can you think of a couple of places in story where those advances actually explained how new skills got made? Are you still with us, Jean? Oh, she must have stepped away. She's still on the channel, so we'll wait till she gets back. But
Oh,
there you are. Sorry about that.
Sorry. I was going to say, are you talking about the fact that we can create a whole new skill?
Well, I was just trying to ask you to show an example of something that happened in game where your persona was subjected to something and you thought, oh, I should probably try to pick up that.
Okay, I had built a character that was an elf, totally ready to be fill the role of a fighter, ranger, scout sort of position,
Mm-hmm.
intelligent with some psionic abilities,
Mm-hmm.
and we lost one character that had that storyline, and then two new people came in, and they wanted to go a totally different way. So I had this elf scout now with a Maruk, which is a seagoing elf, and an amphibious lizard
Seagoing orc.
section, and they wanted to get in this boat and sail south, which no one ever returns to find out if there's anything in the south. So I find myself on the sea.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what did I have to pick up? Swimming. I hadn't picked that up. I mean, you know, when you live in the forest, you don't often think about swimming, and especially since I could walk across most rivers, you know, without getting my feet wet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and here I am in a boat in an ocean I can't exactly walk across because it isn't a relatively small body of water.
Exactly.
And I couldn't keep going long enough.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm on a boat. I don't know how to fish. Oh, I know how to fish like with my hands and a hook line, but we use a net to catch more fish, so I had to learn that. I had to learn seamanship so I can help them on the ship.
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn to cook out of a pot by building a fire in one pot and putting the other pot over it so you don't burn up the ship.
Yep. Yep.
Classic old sailing ship cooking methods, where the
Mm-hmm.
Dutch oven was invented.
Well,
Not that
that
we
that
have
and you were the first one of the crew to actually look in the sky at night and realize there were asters, stars.
recognizable stars. We haven't had stars in NyCos except for this last iteration. Oh, they've been there early, way early in our history, but then our planet got moved
We
by
think.
magical engines to
Right.
another place that kept it hidden from all the people out there.
Yes.
And so we didn't have stars except for a couple times when things went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Sky split open and we saw stars. It didn't last long, but we saw them.
Yeah.
Now we have stars, and we haven't had stars in 7,000 years.
Something like
So
that.
nobody, we have no star maps because we lost all our history at the end of the sixth iteration. History kind of went away, and so any books on star maps and things like that were totally gone.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And so
so the concept was that you had to learn how to swim. So you picked up the skill. The skill starts off as a very
very
low
low
value
score.
because you're new to it, and then you can train quickly if you've got some fortune on your side and lots of time to practice. And I guess you would say as you're sailing south, you had quite a few days to practice swimming.
Oh yeah, we had all this beautiful weather for 16 days, and
Yeah,
then Helene hit.
yeah, pretty much, pretty much.
Pretty much that's what happened, and we were on the ocean. Luckily, uh, we saw that.
Right, but
Roy,
I don't. We can't go into
yeah,
every possible story. But the point was
yeah,
that the skills can be picked up and added relatively quickly, and the reality is that you can decide to start to learn something at any point. So even if you've never tried it before, you can at least give it the old college try. Beyond skills challenge, you also have skills checks. You also have the skills challenges, and this occurs when the person doing the skill is under duress. Like for example, you are trying to unlock a door using picks and skill of lockpicking. You can do it over a period of a few minutes, but if somebody is chasing you or shooting at you, that the need to do that skill rapidly influences how effectively you can get it done. And so, therefore, the checks and the challenges are the ways of handling skills checks, either before or during duress. After that, you have contests. And a contest is when two individuals are attempting the same skill at the same time to see either who gets finished first or who finishes best. And so, therefore, the die rolling is comparative. So if Gene and let's say another Eldrin are trying to swim across a certain expanse of water, then each one of them would roll, and the contest would end only when one of them succeeds and the other fails, simply meaning that they have accomplished the goal of getting across the body of water first. Beyond
well that
those kind of contests, there are also challenges. I'm sorry, are also called conflicts. And a conflict is when Jean is using her persona's skill at evasion, while say an opponent is trying to chase her down and therefore is rolling their skill at pursuit. And in all cases, the rolling mechanism is a challenged check, so there's almost always a counter roll. So Jean would be
and
rolling against her
that's the
skill.
next best thing about Nikos.
Oh yeah, what's that?
The rolling. you don't just fail or pass. You have degrees of failure. You can get a partial, you can fail. You can have a, just on the number, you can fail up in the 96 through 99 category,
Mm-hmm.
which is really bad stuff. And you can fail at the 100 category, which is catastrophic failure. Likewise, at the other end, you can have a partial success where you, at a score that's double your current score, you can have a wild success, which is under that, which is at half of your score, rounding down. And then you can have that critical, that fantastic success way down at the bottom,
Perfect.
which
Perfect.
is a not one.
Perfect success. Yes.
Yeah. So, in other words, when you pick it up, it isn't, yeah, I hit him, yeah, I don't. Yeah, I gave him a glancing blow, but at least I kept him off me. Okay.
Right.
So we live to fight another day.
Right.
And
Right. And
so,
the relative die rolling mechanism, which I've personally dubbed as quantum die rolling, since when you roll, you're looking at not just one potential number, but you're looking at whether or not it's a partial or a wild or a partial or
success.
wild successes or a complete failure compared to a catastrophic failure. That that thought process means that you, with one die roll, you get a much more cinematic panoply of options from the die roll, and therefore it's easier to describe. And also, almost from looking at the dice, you can almost visualize what that number represents in terms of the relative success or failure compared with your opponent. But the final form of that is actually combat, and combat is really just a fancy contest. In that, with that, your skills can modify the amount of damage you do, or the amount of damage that the opponent does, or modify the number of conditions that you can bring to bear on your opponent. One of the changes that NyCOS really has um, benefited from is the idea of the commitment of conditions. In other words, as you succeed over your opponent, you can put conflict modifiers into play, so, without having to just be a simple numbers game. In role playing games like the classic ones, you have a roll to hit and a defensive value, and if you succeed in doing the hit, then you add this modifier for this and that modifier for that, and pretty soon it's a big jumble of numbers, and it's no longer just the cinematic of I'm swinging for their head and did I knock their hat off. It's just a numbers game, and NyCOS replaces that with a much more cinematic situation, because you compare your success against your target to determine your relative positioning in the conflict, and then their die roll determines whether or not it succeeds or fails. So there's far less. I don't. Has anybody actually intentionally dealt damage that you can think of in a NyCOS conflict since you've been playing NyCOS RPG?
Not for a long time. Oh yeah, we've had a few things we had to kill.
Yes.
You know, aberrant monsters and things like that. But in most cases, the idea is that they're bandits. We take them down and collect the bounty.
Mm-hmm.
We render them, incapable of hurting us or hurting whoever they're at, and then turn them over to the authorities.
Now, what's your take on the success fail mechanism? Do you find that more enjoyable, or is it a is
Well,
it?
much more, only because you can look at the number that you rolled and go, "Oh, what I did was really good," and so I can explain it, and that's what I love about. I love role playing, so I love describing. Okay, that shot did this,
Mm-hmm.
because yeah, I did so well here. He just made the wrong move, and I got in there and got him right there and clunked him on the side of the head, or I took out, I tripped him or took out a leg and knocked him down. So the conditions are like You can knock them prone. You
Mm-hmm.
can stun them,
Mm-hmm.
daze them. You can knock them unconscious, basically rendering your foe helpless. Of course, from stun, they get a chance of getting up next time, but in the meantime, they'd have to.
Well, I need to
Oh,
stop you there. Remember, though, that a success versus a failure, it ends the battle.
yeah,
So if you've succeeded and they have failed, there is no continuation. They can reinitiate if they want to, but they're going to reinitiate with all kinds of adverse conditions already in place by what the players did in the previous round.
yep,
So the conveyance of the conditions is really the critical point, because let's say you were fighting along the wall of a castle and you wanted to try to shove the other guy off the wall. In a traditional role play game, there is no mechanism for that. The game master, unless the game master just flat out agrees to let your attack do such a thing, there are no rules that say, you know, you can give somebody a shove. Whereas in NyCOS RPG, once you've successfully uh, conveyed a condition, you can convey that condition as I'm shoving you 10 feet and if I'm pushing you off the wall. So we can have the things that you see in the movies where the guys don't necessarily have to fight the fight all the way to somebody dying. They can actually give them a shove.
and the other thing I like is if somebody's really good, and some of the people are getting really good at their particular fighting skills, uh, you can you can almost not fail except on 96 through 100.
Mm-hmm.
But so, but the thing is that they get you don't get a whole bunch of shots before they get a shot. That's not realistic. If it's the only way that D&D does it, others have done it where you get a shot, they get a shot, you get a shot, they get a shot. If you're much faster than them, then in the end you'll get an extra shot. Well, in this one, you hit, they can counter. And they might not be good at it, but they can counter. So it
Mm-hmm.
might kind of take your hit down. You not didn't do quite as well, but eventually your superior skill will beat them out because then they'll not have that last bit that allows them to overcome you.
Well,
That's hopefully.
there are skills as you have already devised, though, especially once you've already become an expert of at a certain fighting style. You can modify that so that you can get multiple arrows off in a round or whatever as
Yeah.
as an extension of your skill. So
It's kind of almost like getting feats, but it's kind of better than that because you can really sculpt a character.
well, in the case of feats, as I said before, in classic roleplay games, the access to feats is capricious and random, and we have no idea how they came to be. In other words, a person could be not having any skill with a bow and then have bow mastery for no reason. There was no training, no
Yeah.
montage of skill advancement, no training time, and the NyCOS mechanism actually
Yeah.
uh, doubles down on that by having the very means to purchase a treatise, a book to teach yourself, or to hire a trainer to teach you how to do whatever the particular skill is you're
That
looking
yeah,
for.
that's it. And there's just learning on the move. When you
Mm-hmm.
don't have time, you're not where you can buy a treatise, you're not where you can uh, uh, uh,
Attend a
buy a
class.
trainer or put the time in with a trainer, which is about 5 solid weeks of training.
Mm-hmm.
You and you don't have that time because your group is moving on, then you can get this treatise, a book, and they're relatively inexpensive
Mm-hmm.
in terms of money, but then you can study that for 10 weeks and you can build at least get up to your base skill in it. And then after that, you if it's always written at least 51 skill. So after that, you can continue reading it as you're working, and I'll give you one extra point when you when you're going up.
Getting into the weeds of how it works, yes. But the point is that with the NyCOS mechanism, if you want to learn a skill, you do it within the story homogeneously. You find a way to make it fit with what you're doing, or you do that thing. Like, for example, if you say, well, I want to learn how to use the magical system, well, you can either buy a treatise and study the book on how to become a magi, or you can go to a training school and take courses in the skill, or you can just simply give it a shot and try, and that doesn't preclude you from being successful, because magic is, after all, in the world of NyCOS, everywhere and at all times. So you can pick it up even out of the thin air, pardon the pun there, but to do so, then your initial skill is going to be way reduced. It's going to be down to the, as we discussed before, the core value for that particular skill type. So therefore, if you are wanting to pick up, whether it's lariat roping or Magic 101, or you want to have your muffins toast themselves in the morning, those are all skills that you can develop as in play. And because it's an ongoing thing, every session you can advance it. So pretty soon your muffins will be fixed for you every morning when you wake up.
I know what I want to create. You just gave me the idea. Pans of cooking and seasoning. They heat themselves up and they put whatever seasonings you want on them. There we go.
So you're talking about literally having a Mexican platter? That's very funny, Gene.
Yeah, basically something like that.
No, I'm just saying that's
you know who's thinking of it? Marianne.
Oh, of course. Very funny. Very funny.
That's my first Techmage character I ever played in any game system. They're known as halflings in other systems and earlier systems, hobbits, but
Yep. So beyond those, the mechanism is so easy that somebody who's never played any role-playing games before can pick it up in 5 minutes. That's not a brash boast. I've actually experientially done it with now dozens of people, from literally sitting down and handing the persona sheet to them actually making player decisions in less than 5 minutes as the persona. So this is a system that's going to revolutionize the way people play, and the genres are really where I think the real magic is that the NyCOS mechanism is not set up just to be for the fantasy setting, although that is the only one that, well, it's not the only one anymore, but the one that we generally play the most. But it does afford the opportunity to play in literally the role-play roulette mechanism, where you you spin a spinner just to see which genre you're going to play in, and as the players build their personas, the storyteller builds the actual adventure right there on a piece of paper, and you're done. Both sides.
Yeah, the 6 basic stats, and you can get a person to play, because every skill they want to think they have, they can just refer back to their base stat until they get to a certain number of stats, and then after that it has to be treatised, learned, or trained.
Yes. Yep. So, Gene, why don't you describe the I think the best way for someone who is not a player of NyCOS to get to understand what we're talking about here is for you to talk through that very visceral first combat with the Floravor.
The feathered dinosaur?
Yeah, the Floravor thorn beast, as we've come up with.
Yeah. There was just 3 of us in the group, very tight-knit group. And we were traveling through an area that is called the wilderness, or the wilds.
Wilderlands.
Wilderlands.
Right.
Any, anyway, we were in this area and we come across our 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 Nietzschean elf, which is one of the small elves. Uh, Heard something in the forest and went off. I am a second cat. I, of course, hit it, jump up into the trees and start leaping from branch to branch in the forest. Um, he comes across a rather large dinosaur lizard creature, very much in the lizard form. Uh, it's frilled, it's spined, it's got a wicked tail, claws on it, like all lizards do, in the front and the back. This very big mouth with lots of teeth, and but the strangest thing, it was feathered and it was scaled. But our brave little Nietzschean elf, he is a wonderful bowman, and he takes off a shot, and he shoots it, and he aggravates it because it just kind of bounces out, so it charges him. So I race out, and the only thing I can do is pounce. Meanwhile, our third member, who is a giant red panda um, knight, fighter who has turned knight and champion, um, says, "Oh, what's a lot of noise?" So he goes in there and he comes in, and the lizard thing knocks him down. Well, he happened to be, quote unquote, my husband. We
Mm-hmm.
were, anyway. Uh, when that happened, I leaped on the thing tooth and nail, and between that him getting up, Stormcrow getting up, and me ripping and tearing, occasionally I can go tooth and claw. I mean, it gets rather primal,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in a very primal state at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And but cinematically, with the him being one being knocked over,
Okay.
charged,
Now,
one being
before
the
we go any further, Gene, now how long would that fight have taken if it was a traditional role play game? How many rounds do you think that
oh,
fight would have
I
gone?
I couldn't tell you how many rounds it could have taken. I
Uh,
really couldn't. I would tell you it would be 20 to 30 minutes to get through the three characters and all their shots and everything they had to do. I think we were done in what? Under 5?
well, I was just going to say about as fast as you described it just now is about how
True.
quickly it happened,
The longest
because
time was traveling through the woods to find, what it was we heard.
well, and the point I was trying to make is that with each of those points that you described occurring, that was resolved with a single die roll. There wasn't 3 rounds of you wrestling with the creature. There was not 4 or 5 rounds of you attempting to shoot it with the bow. You were those each one of those was a single action in
Yep.
terms of gameplay. So we were able to reconcile a fight that might have taken 20 minutes to 2 hours in a standard role play game in about 5 to 8 minutes.
I can't think of any battle we had, even with that, uh, the Proteus Prime.
Yeah,
Took us longer to get to him than it did to kill it. But yeah,
right.
and it was what I love about it. It's so cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
You feel that you are there doing these things because you're not waiting for the next person to go and then his second strike and his third strike and his fourth strike, you know, and they're going da 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 da. You go, they go, the next one goes, and then it's yada yada yada, and everybody rolls and they got right on the mark. They're almost like rolling as soon as you're through, so they know what they're doing, and you say that's what I'm doing. I my bow was no good. I had tooth and claw. That was my next best
Well, and
weapon.
again, mechanically, it wasn't a situation of sitting and listening to a string of numbers. The actual fight scene was this number against that number. Okay, conflict goes this way. Next round. Boom, boom, boom. And it's a matter of expedition.
It is
Um,
very expeditious.
Now, as far as persona advancement, have you found it to be too much of a burden to actually track your own advancement compared to, say, adding feats and skills under other systems?
Oh no, because you get a point a week when you use it. And so I just made my own sheet and I
Mm-hmm.
have a place to tally it and I have them on computer. So when I'm done, I can just take the tally and then transfer it over into the computer. The
So,
longest time it took me was to develop
the actual
my own
sheet.
character sheet with big print.
Yes. Well, the reason why I asked that is that there are individuals I've talked to when I explain that it's self-regulated. They're concerned with players, quote, cheating the system and putting down moderately high numbers arbitrarily. This week having a 25 in the skill, and next week having a 65, and the storyteller not being able to recognize that difference. Have you found the
I've never recognized the fact where anybody has done it. Question been a questionable a couple of times, but nothing so outrageous that you're going, oh no, you know.
mm-hmm,
Because first of all, you can look at their base numbers; those never change, so
mm-hmm,
you know where they started. And
mm-hmm,
if all of a sudden they're in the third week and they went from 25 to 65, you said there's no way.
mm-hmm?
Not unless you show me that you ramped. And you remember the ramps when we ramp.
Yes, I think that's the whole point. There is just like when we in our reality, when we get a moment of inspiration and we suddenly get we advance our skill in any given thing. I can tell you that you remember it. You remember the day that you learned how to ride your bicycle.
Like, oh, yeah, you learn to ride your bicycle because and kept going straight without falling off of it.
Yep.
And it's like, and after that, it's like I could get on a bike 20 years later and I still knew how to ride a bike.
Right.
I couldn't go as far.
Yep. 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 Well, I also want to talk for a second. I'm going to switch visuals here. I'm going to take us to the map room and
Oh, yay.
ask the question in a different way, and that is, what is NyCOS, Gene? If I had to have you explain what NyCOS is, not the game system,
Nycos,
not the game system, but the
Nycos,
world,
Nycos as a whole game or Nycos the planet?
the world.
The world is a smallish world. Um, Actually, it's not much more than just slightly bigger than our own moon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got a very quick horizon line, which we are finding out. We finally figured it out mathematically, just like we finally figured out mathematically the area of a hex.
Yep.
um, Nonetheless, the what's on the map right now are what were once three continents, but they got pushed together in one of the iterations when somebody broke the land bridge that was off on the far west hand side of this map in the northern area.
Mm-hmm.
There was a land bridge to somewhere else, but the giants took what were an axe called an axe or a sword.
It was
Anyway,
it was Matic. So
a mallet, a hammer,
yep.
and broke the land that joined it with somewhere else, but we don't know where else. And in the three iterations I've played in, no one knows what's beyond these this single conglomerate, this Pangea of Nikos,
Nice.
where they all got pushed together one time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we don't even know if some of us, our lands are sitting on the equator or not, because we have no way to judge what's on the rest of the planet.
Yep.
Um, we're sitting in the nimbus of a protostar, which we call strangely Nimbus, uh, which is the home of the dragon. And they're basically all prismatic dragons.
Mm-hmm.
And they come here to breed, lay their eggs, and then go home. So you hardly ever see them. The only time you see them is when somebody interferes with them.
Mm-hmm.
If they hurt them, then they'll turn into chromatic dragons. If they praise them, they'll turn into
Metallics.
metallic dragons.
Mm-hmm.
But then they're earthbound. They can't go back if
Right.
they're not in their original form. So
Yeah.
kind of stuck here. None of them are happy.
Yeah.
None of them are happy.
Pretty,
Uh,
pretty
so as I
succinct.
said,
How much?
oh, and
How much of Nikos have your personas visited, Gene? If you were
I
to.
have gone from the shores of the north of the right-hand continent, which is known as Yardom. I hate that name only because I hate the race it's named for. I've gone down all the way. Well, now I'm about 20 hexes, which is 20 times 50 is 1,000 miles. We're 20 hexes down now. Yeah, so that's about 1,000 miles off the southern coast of Yarlum. I have been to the far west of Grolum to the north and to a lot of this across the north and this mid portion between the two mountain ranges that one to the far north and the whole bunch of um, broken lands that are in this upper part of Rolam. And the
Mm-hmm.
other continent is a little continent up here, and it was Cryopapia. Cryopapia actually sits on the pole or near the pole.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're over there, east is west and west is east because you're on the other, quote unquote, the other side of the world. So
Mm-hmm.
you can't have to ignore those funny lines he drew there because the pole is somewhere over here.
Yeah, ignore those lines. Don't pay any attention to those critical nexus points where they all connect. Ignore the
Yeah,
fact that it looks like there's monoliths or objects of some power there. Ignore
they're
them.
called ziggurats. And they were used to move this planet by using the power of the dark shards,
Dun, dun, dun. Alrighty. Well, we
and
are
which
at
is
the
his fantasy book.
we're in the wind down of this episode, Gene. So if you had to ask a new person to play Nikos, how would you do it?
uh, come on in. If you like role playing or you don't know anything about role playing, we can have you playing in about 5 minutes. And then we give them roll it up. Actually, I'd probably give them a set number of stats. And you said 45, 40, 35, 30, 25,
20.
20.
Yep.
You know, and give them the stats, and you just simply say, nothing is unusable. There is no such thing as a dump stat
Mm-hmm.
because everything you do, because you can have so many different skills in so many different areas,
Mm-hmm.
could be important. And I always hate it when I have to put my lowest score someplace where I really wanted a high score, but I had ran out of high scores.
Yes.
And for every character, it's been slightly different because I played at that time before we were fully in NYCOS, I played a cleric, basically a fighter ranger sort of character, but we were beginning to play NYCOS at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a elf ranger, pure ranger
Mm-hmm.
type, and a Azamar, a celestial bloodline character that was kind of a mixture of stuff because we were beginning to play more and more with Nikos.
Yes.
So she acted like healer and she acted to with magics to help defend people. So um
Yeah. The the way I say it, Gene, is that Nikos is a 12,000-year-old tale, 50 years in the making. Yes, it took me this long to codify the rules, but that's because there were so many things that I had come to admire about the Dungeons and Dragons mechanism that now have been basically systematically eliminated from that mechanism to make it act literally to the point where it would be no fun to play anymore. So it's not NyCOS is not your clumsy old system. It's a new old way to play. It brings back the our childhood, really.
The fun.
The idea of
It
the
brings
theater of the mind. With that, we're playing in an environment that we don't need miniatures. We don't need uh,
maps.
art renderings. We like our maps, but
Yeah, we like our maps
they're
to
not
refer
required.
to.
But the combat is cinematic. The conversation, the dialogue is what drives the game. Player progression rather than game master controlled progression. The system is elegant, intuitive, quick to learn, and skills based, so it is truly infinite in scope. So thank you for listening to this advanced conversation about the world of NyCOS and the rules of the world. Thank you, Gene, for joining us and going through all of this. And I want to encourage everyone, if you haven't taken a look at NycosRPG, you can look at the property at NycosRPG.com. There you can purchase the PDF versions, or you can go to lulu.com to buy the hard copies of those properties. There's going to be so much more coming. The master book is in final editing right now, so we should have the pre-release version of that within a month. And for more information on the property itself, check out NycosRPG.info, where you can get a big lore dump of what all's going on in the world of NyCOS. And of course, if you look at our Patreon program and join that, you actually get access to our Saturday and Sunday games, and you can join Jean in her various attempts to understand and learn more about the world of NyCOS. Thank you again for being here, folks, and we will see you all in the next episode.